Well, let's move on to your testimony on cybersecurity, which you called one of the biggest risks to the financial system. And it is a very serious one, and it's a huge problem, particularly for virtual currencies like Bitcoin and Ether. And virtual currency exchanges are constantly being hacked. A few years ago, the largest Bitcoin exchange in the world was breached and lost over 450 million worth of Bitcoin. And just 2 weeks ago, another virtual currency exchange in Japan was hacked, and they lost $550 million worth of virtual currency, the largest heist in history. A recent report found that about 14% of all of the major virtual currencies have been stolen by hackers. And this means that if you hold a major virtual currency, there's a 1 in 7 chance that you've had your money stolen, a staggering statistic. But right now, these virtual currencies, their exchanges aren't subject to any real cybersecurity standards. Just last week, SEC Chairman Clayton said that he thinks some exchanges should be regulated by the SEC, which would require them to develop cybersecurity standards and to prevent fraudulent practices like price manipulation. So my question is, given that virtual currency exchanges are collectively holding billions of dollars for U.S. investors, which can disappear in the blink of an eye if hackers break in, should these virtual currency exchanges be subject to minimum cybersecurity standards to protect investors' money? It is a currency, but it is being treated by many people as an investment, so I'm very concerned.
I broadly share your concerns. Last year, I set up a subcommittee of FSOC to specifically deal with cryptocurrencies. We've made a lot of progress on that. You've focused on several issues which I agree with. The two issues that I've focused on are, one, we want to make sure that these exchanges can't be used for moving money to bad people. So in the United States, if you're a Bitcoin wallet, you're subject to the same anti-money laundering BSA requirements as a bank. We've brought enforcement actions on that. We're working with the G20 to make sure that those rules are followed in other countries so that these don't become like old Swiss numbered bank accounts. The other area of grave concern is the concern to the consumer. We've recently had futures listed. We've done a lot of work with the regulators to make sure that where there is consumer protection, it's appropriate. And I too share your concerns about the cyber attacks and having people's money that's safe. So this is something we're actively studying, and we'd be happy to follow up with your office on your ideas.
Thank you very much, and I do have a draft bill I'd like to share with you.
Sure. Last week, the Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigation, which I chair, held a hearing entitled Following the Money, How Human Traffickers Exploit U.S. Financial Markets. During that hearing, we talked a lot about the emergence of cryptocurrencies as a financial tool. I know you touched on it briefly, but the FSOC annual report identifies a need to further study new products and services such as virtual currencies and to coordinate regulatory approaches. How do you believe these new technologies should be regulated, and what role should we in Congress have going forward as these new innovations are advanced?
Thank you. My main concern in terms of regulation is to make sure that anybody that does business on cryptocurrencies can be monitored from a money laundering, a BSA standpoint, and that the institution follows the Know Your Customer rules. So that's our main priority now, but we look forward to working with you on potentially other regulations.
And what do you see as FSOC's role in this process, sir?
FSOC is coordinating the different regulators' response to it, so it's a coordination function.
We look very forward to working with you and your team in this important area that is emerging.
I do want to raise up the issue of the fintech companies. I'm the Democratic chairman of the fintech caucus. And the fintech industry is going through some remarkable challenges, and they're doing some great things just from simply being able to partner with many of our traditional banks who will not service the underbanked and those that need the help the most, but they are partnering with them. And they're also bringing a way for real great technological improvement. But here's the problem. Since OC has issued or going to issue a charter for their regulation, you have all of these regulators now. The CFP has their group. You have Treasury. I don't know if you have your group, but each of these regulatory firms are now converging and coming up with how to regulate this industry. Now, when you have 3 or 4 different regulators out there beginning to pounce, you're going to have overregulation. You're going to quite possibly suffocate this new emerging industry. So I want to ask you, how do you see that? And is Treasury moving? And as the leader of FSOC, will you take leadership in making sure that fintech companies are not suffering?
A very brief answer,
Yes.
Mr. Secretary.
Yes,
I'd
thank
remind
you.
all members to pay attention carefully to the clock. A brief answer, Mr. Secretary.
Yes, thank you. We will address that at FSOC. We share some of your concerns.
So let's just start with the virtual currencies. And we've seen tremendous fluctuation in the market, particularly over the last year. Where it reached some 19,000 Bitcoin, for instance, in mid-December. It's down around 6,000 or so today. What steps is Treasury, how are you looking at these virtual currencies, and what do you think needs to be done, if anything?
Well, I share your concerns on it, and as I mentioned earlier, there's 2 major focus. So one, we've set up a subcommittee of FSOC to make sure that we have the various different regulators working together, since these are new areas. Number one, I want to make sure that anybody who uses Bitcoins, that we can understand how they're transacting, so that they're subject to BSA rules, they're subject to money laundering, they're subject to know your customer. So in the United States, we have those rules. We're working with our counterparts at the G20. I want to be careful that this doesn't turn into Swiss-numbered bank accounts. So bad guys can't use these. The second thing is I do share your concern about making sure that consumers understand them, and to the extent that they're now trading on futures exchanges, that the futures exchanges have the proper regulation of the underlying markets so that they can't be manipulated.
Okay.
I've been concerned also about the cost to investors on certain mandatory disclosure requirements that seem to be targeted at, say, social investing and social questions other than what might be considered within the ambit of the traditional materiality concept. And so, do you have an opinion on the, say, the proliferation of these requirements and ultimately what impact they could have on capital formation, economic growth?
I think there should be proper disclosure, but as you said, we need to be careful as to what that proper disclosure is.